Hi everyone, this is John Bacon and welcome to another episode of the Community Management Crib Notes. This is episode number 2. You can find out more when these videos are coming out by subscribing to the YouTube channel, by pressing that lovely big button up there. You can also follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/JohnO'Bacon and check out the blog at johnobacon.org. Now many of the topics in these videos, and indeed the topic in this video, are in my book, which is The Art of Community, published by O'Reilly. Find out more about that at artofcommunityonline.org, and of course its Twitter feed at twitter.com/artofcommunity. So today I'm going to talk about a really important topic, and it's the topic of burnout. This is something that has affected many of us. It's affected me, and I'm going to talk about what it is when we know we've got it, and some of the stages that can indicate if we're suffering from burnout. This is a really important topic for community managers to be aware of, because burnout is definitely something that affects our communities. So today I'm actually going to give a presentation that I've been given for a little while now at conferences, and I thought it would be valuable to put it online. And in this presentation I'm going to explain what burnout is and talk through something called the burnout cycle, which is a progressive series of steps that can provide different indications about when someone's suffering from burnout. And then I'll also top it off with some suggestions about how you can avoid it in your community and of course in yourself. So, fasten your seatbelts, my friends. Let's talk about burnout.
Okay, so let's get started. I first gave this presentation about 3 or 4 years ago at a company conference, and I chose the topic of burnout because of one very specific example. And that example was myself. I burnt out pretty bad about 4 or 5 years ago. Of course, I didn't realize I was burning out because I didn't know what burnout was. But what I did realize is that I wasn't myself, and I wasn't behaving like myself. I was pretty grumpy and miserable with people. I was shouting at my girlfriend. I was panicking about work. I was panicking about where I was going with my life, all that kind of stuff. Now, I went away for 3 or 4 days to visit a friend, and I relaxed. I unplugged from the internet and from my work, and that helped me through it. And I eventually got through this burnout period. And I later realized, about a year later, in fact, that I'd burnt out when I learned a bit more about the subject. Now, spin forward probably 2 years or 2 or 3 years, and I started writing The Art of Community, the first edition of my book. And I wanted to talk about this experience and talk about the importance of understanding burnout, but I didn't have a particularly good way of articulating the different stages that are involved in burnout. I then came across this issue of a magazine, the Scientific American Mind magazine, and they had a really good article called The Science of Burnout. And in that article, it talked about something called the burnout cycle. And this was created by Herbert, I'm not going to pronounce that word, and Gail North. Now, the burnout cycle is basically a series of stages. It's 12 stages in particular of rapidly worsening stages of severity when you're burning out. So stage number 1 is basically, I'm a bit frustrated with the world, I might shout at my dog. Stage number 12 is basically jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. Now, there are a series of stages between them, but each of them map to common signs and symptoms of burnout, and these give us a good way of identifying when either we're burning out or people who we know are burning out, and then we can look out for the signs and we can treat them more appropriately. Now, I just want to put forward one important caveat. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. This is just something that I learned, I wrote about in the book. So if you have concerns, medical concerns, psychological concerns about yourself or somebody else, please go and see a medical professional. Don't listen to some guy on YouTube. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through these 12 steps in the same way that I talked through them in my original presentation. And I think that understanding and learning the symptoms can help us to see what's going on and how far along we are. And then I'm going to talk about some ways of dealing with burnout towards the end of this presentation. Now, when I originally gave this presentation, I was stunned by the reaction. I got up, I went through the 12 steps, and a ton of people came up to me afterwards and said, I had no idea that I was being affected by these symptoms. I had no idea that I was at stage 5 or 6 or whatever. So I'm hoping that this is going to be useful for you folks as well. So let's start right at the beginning at stage 1. This is proving yourself. Typically, one of the first signs of burnout is that we feel like we need to prove that we're good at what we do. If you're working in a company, you feel like you need to work a little bit harder to show that you're good at what you do. Maybe you feel like you're not getting the validation and the respect that you should do in your work. So what we tend to do is work a little bit harder. We'll maybe work an extra hour a night. Maybe send a little bit more email on that, than we would do. But we start being a bit more obsessive about demonstrating our worth and what we bring. Now, this doesn't just affect work, but it can also affect our private life and demonstrating your worth to your partner or to your family or other people. So we just start getting a little bit more obsessive, born out of a little bit of insecurity about where we are. Let's then spin on to stage 2. Now, as I said, we start working harder, and we really do. We start working longer hours. We find it harder to switch off. If you start finding yourself laid in bed at night or sitting on the couch with your partner or with your friends watching TV or in a social situation, and finding it a little bit more difficult to kind of get work or whatever's going on in your life out of your head, then this is a good indication that things are starting to roll with the burnout. We start working longer to prove that sense of self-worth. We start putting in longer hours. We start trying to do more, trying to fit more into our lives, trying to send more email, trying to fit more tasks in, trying to accomplish more things. That's stage 2. Now we then go into stage 3, and this is when we start. This is when things start getting a little crazy. We start ignoring some of the most important needs that we have in our lives. So imagine the situation. This is what happened to me. I was starting to feel a bit insecure about my work. I felt like I needed to prove myself, and thus I was working harder and I was working longer hours. And because of this, I had a pretty erratic sleeping pattern. I was working at 11, 12 o'clock at night. I was waking up sometimes in the middle of the night and checking my email. So my sleeping pattern got disrupted, and of course, when you don't get enough sleep, then it makes you tired, and when you get tired, then it makes you more frustrated, and often it makes the situation worse. The other thing, and I definitely found this, was that my eating was disrupted, because I was constantly feeling this need to work. I was less willing to take time to cook and to go out and buy some healthy food and that kind of stuff. So I started eating a lot of crap. I started eating fast food and junk food. I started drinking a lot of soda, drinking a lot of coffee and tea so I could stay awake at night, so I could get more work in. So my eating got disrupted. The other thing is that I found myself with more of a lack of social interaction. Where I traditionally go out and spend some time on a Thursday or a Friday night with friends, I'd sometimes cancel on some of my friends and stay in so I could catch up on some work. So I was now finding myself just doing a lot more work and making a lot of time for work. And of course, in these early stages, often your employer they'll welcome that. They'll be, it's great to see you working harder. Pay rise for you. But this is the beginning stages of a burnout cycle. So, things were not what they should have been, shall we say. So on to stage 4. I started then, and this definitely happened to me, and this is common in burnout, where you start feeling panicky and jittery about your work and what you're doing. So often, in these kinds of situations, you feel like this obsessive need to prove yourself and to show your worth means that when you feel like you're not accomplishing that, you feel like people are deriding you, like people are talking about you not doing a particularly good job. You feel threatened. You maybe feel like your job is threatened. And this is where the stress is really starting to set in. The thing about feeling threatened, of course, is that then it kicks off there's like a domino effect of other things that can occur as well. So, you think to yourself, I'm panicking whether I'm doing a good job at work. What happens if I'm not doing a good job at work? What happens if they fire me? How is that going to look in terms of my community? How's that going to look to other employers? How's that going to look to my family? How am I going to find a job? Am I really very good? These are the kind of things that can often happen at this stage of burnout. This is where I was before I went on my trip. This is where I pretty much got to. At this point, I knew that something was going on in my life, and I needed to get some time away to deal with it. So, the other element of this is that often problems are dismissed. What happens is some people will start maybe making a few comments about what's going on with you. Maybe you start looking down on other people at work who you're working with and assume that they're the source of the issues as opposed to yourself. So it's at this point we're starting to think to ourselves, you know what? I'm working a lot right now. I'm putting all the hours in. These issues can't be with me. They must be with other people. Why can't people just leave me alone and let me get on with my job and that kind of stuff? So So then on to stage 5. Now this is when things definitely start getting. I think this is when things start edging into fairly serious territory. Your values tend to be skewed at this point. Some of the things that were important to you beforehand, such as spending time with family and friends, making time for your partner, making time to just get away and do the things that you enjoy outside of your work or whatever. These tend to be dismissed. Friends and family, it's harder to justify it. You get to a point at this point where you really need to justify time with your friends and family because this time is seen as time away from work. Instead of doing your hobbies, you want to work on your work to deal with that sense of proving your self-worth and to offset the panic that you're feeling that you're not doing a particularly good job. So work becomes your only focus. And if there's one thing I've learned over my time working as a community manager, or really, I think this can be applied to anyone, is that sometimes being away from things is a real investment in doing a great job. And ironically, this applies to music. As a musician, one thing that I've found with a lot of my fellow musicians is that sometimes if you take a week away from playing music, when you come back, you're a better musician. It's as if something happens, something you soak up things subconsciously as a sponge. And time away from your work, time with your friends and your families and blowing off some steam is good. But at this point, you don't see it as good. You see it as distractions away from trying to prove your self-worth. So at stage 6, this is when we start getting. This is when we start seeing some pretty grumpy attitude happening. You start becoming cynical and intolerant. You become intolerant of other people. You become intolerant of your family and your friends for wanting to take you away from your work. You become intolerant of people trying to try to. You see it as interfering, but other people will see it as trying to help you. Sometimes you can be a little bit more aggressive. Now, this is depending on the kind of person that you are, but some people will be more aggressive than others. This can be as simple as just being grumpy with people, or this can turn into to sometimes physical aggression. The other element here is where you assign blame. Colleagues are often blamed at this point. The lack of time that you have is blamed. You don't feel like there's enough hours in the day to do what you need to do. You feel like there's so much work that needs to be completed, and you just don't have time to do it. So your workload is blamed as well. So basically, at this point, you're seeing. I think there's an element of feeling like a bit of a victim at this point. The world is against you. You're just trying to do a good job. You're trying to prove how good you are. You're trying to prove that you have clear worth in the scheme of things, and all of these things are conspiring against you. And this naturally is combined. Remember the earlier stages as well. At this point, you're probably not sleeping particularly well. You're not eating particularly well. You're not spending time away with your family and your friends. Each of these different things are all contributing to the fact that you are just getting burned. You're just getting nice and crispy at this point. So stage 7 is when we start seeing real withdrawal happening. This is often when family and friends this is when family and friends are often noticing some of the issues that we've got going on. Your social life is small and pretty much non-existent in many cases. People that just aren't seeing you. You're just constantly working, and when they do see you, you're grumpy and miserable and short with them. This is often when people start resorting to some other things in their lives to try and relieve some of the stress. It's as if you feel this buildup of stress and you feel like you need to resort to alcohol or, in some cases, drugs or whatever else to take the stress away. This is when you might find yourself drinking a little bit more or indulging in some kind of drugs or whatever it might be to try and just take that feeling away to provide you with a temporary relief. And of course, that's a very, very dangerous position to be in, particularly when we've got alcohol and drugs involved. So you're stepping back, you're not seeing as many people, but you're just feeling like this thing's inside you and you need to get some relief there. Stage 8 is when we start seeing some pretty odd behavior happening. This is when your friends and family are likely to start intervening. Your changes in the behavior become very obvious. This is when outbursts and strange activity in your workplace and at home is going to occur. This is likely going to bring real stress to your relationships, to your partner. You're probably going to be not a lot of fun to live with at home. Your friends and family are going to definitely be concerned and know that something's going on. But of course, you're probably at this point going to still be very dismissive of what's going on. You're probably going to be dismissive of the problems and say, you know, I've got all this work to do. I need to do this. And everyone's just piling up in front of me and stopping me from doing this. I've noticed that with when I've talked to people about burnout as well, is that a lot of people use the excuse of, you know, this is just a temporary blip, you know, I've just got a lot on right now. And I've just got a lot on right now occurs in some situations, but people often use that as an excuse for the fact that they're burning out. Because I think a lot of people don't like to accept that they're burning out. That's just, I think, the way some of us are wired up. So anyway, so we start seeing these some of this kind of strange behavior happening, and very, very frustrated person. And friends and family are definitely concerned about that. So onto stage 9. This is often when we start depersonalizing. This is when the things that make you stop being you. This is when I think stage 9 is really when we need to start seeing some serious. We probably start need to seeing some medical attention at this point. This is often when depression sets in, a real feeling of worthlessness. Beforehand, it was a case of, you know I can do this stuff. I just need to prove myself. I've just got a lot to do, but I'll get there. Often at this point, I'm feeling pretty worthless, and there is a lack of confidence, and life just starts to feel pretty mechanical and emotionless. You get up in the morning, you make your cup of coffee, you go to work, you deal with your whatever amount of time at work. You work in the evenings as well because you're putting all these extra hours in, and you start forgetting what it's like to smile and to have fun and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, this is a pretty depressing time for somebody. And, you start feeling really beaten down by the world at this point. And then we go into stage 10. Hang in there, my friends. I know it gets pretty depressing towards the end of this. But stage 10 is when we start seeing some pretty inner emptiness going on. You start feeling empty and lonely. This is when addiction can often set in, alcohol and drugs. What's often been reported in burnout situations as well is people often take on pretty unusual kind of sexual practices as well. Because the thing about sex and alcohol and drugs is that they all offer some kind of relief. And there is a feeling of emptiness and loneliness, and this depersonalization that's been occurring is something that you need relief from. So booze, drugs, and sex are ways in which you can try and accomplish that. But of course, there are risks associated with all of those things, particularly in excess. This is often when we start seeing people overeating. I mean, I talked earlier on about your eating can be disrupted in the same way that your sleep can be disrupted, but often the overeating is again a sense of relief. People just want to eat comfort food. I remember I experienced this at one point in my life where I just had so much to do, and remember how I said these stages can occur at different different points, and some of these symptoms can occur outside of these stages and things like that. Well, I had the overeating thing for a little while, many years ago, and I felt like I was trying to prove myself, and to comfort myself I just used to eat a lot of McDonald's and KFC and all that kind of stuff. So and of course what this makes you is this often makes you pretty fat and unhealthy, and if you're not getting a lot of sleep and you're drinking caffeine all the time and drinking too much and doing drugs and engaging in bizarre sexual practices, this makes somebody a pretty weak person. On to stage 11. This is when depression really, serious depression really sets in. This is beyond just feeling pretty mechanical and like you're just a cog in the machine. This is when you're feeling pretty lost and you don't know what to do, and you're just completely exhausted. This is often when, you're not eating well, you're not sleeping, you're working too much, you don't feel like you're being able to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. And the future just feels pretty bleak and dark. This is often when, when the panicking is at its worst. This is when people start thinking, I'm not good at what I do. I'm going to get fired. I'm not good at this community management business. I'm going to be, I feel like I need to do something else, but I don't know what I'm going to do because I'm useless. This is often when you're looking at everything in a pretty half-empty kind of way. And then, of course, onto the final stage. This is onto the final stage. This is when it's basically physical and mental collapse. This is basically when people start contemplating suicide. In some cases, there's just a desperation for a way out. There's a desperation to just stop feeling the way you're feeling. Your life has become just a series of approaches to try and relieve the stress and the pain that you feel. You feel mental pain, you feel physically unfit, you feel physically unwell. And this is often when people start contemplating doing something silly and committing suicide. So this is the good news is that most people don't get anywhere near stage 12. Burnout is just something that kind of they get to a certain degree and then they deal with it and they get on with it. But there is a risk there. There is a risk that this, as you can see throughout all of these stages, is that it can build on top of it. It's a bit like a wedding cake. The first layer happens, then another layer can happen, another layer can happen. But I want to just emphasize that this does not affect everybody. If you start feeling a little burnt out, it doesn't mean that you're going to get to stage 12. But I think having an awareness of these things is good in knowing that if you are affected by some of these things, then you may be burning out and you need to do something about it. So the big question is, when talking about this, is how do we deal with it? I mean, how do we handle this not only in ourselves, but also in our communities? Now, handling it in yourself should be easier. You now know the stages of burnout. You know the 12 stages of the burnout cycle. What I'd like to recommend you do is that you replay this YouTube video a bunch of times and you go through and remember all of these stages. And if you see them happening in yourself, then you know that you need to do something about it. Great ways of dealing with burnout are just unplugging. Like I said to you earlier on, when it affected me, I just unplugged and I went on a trip for 3 or 4 days. I went out into the countryside. I saw some friends. I just got away from it. And by the time I came back, I was ready to get back into my work. I was ready to get excited about my work again. For the first day of my holiday, it was difficult. I felt the temptation, particularly, in the age of smartphones and tablets and all the rest of it. I felt the urge to check my email. I felt the urge to be constantly connected, but I forced myself to disconnect. And it was the best thing I could have ever done. So if you start feeling some of the stages of burnout, just take some time off work. Just get away from it. If you are not necessarily working or you're just working inside a community, you spend a lot of time in a community, just take some time away from the community. There's nothing wrong with telling your manager or your fellow community members, I need to get away from it for a little while. And get away and take some time off. I'd also recommend as well that when you start feeling some of these stages, don't be tempted by the booze and the alcohol as solutions, and also don't be tempted by just eating a load of crap and not exercising. Get yourself fit. A healthy lifestyle is in itself motivating and feeling good about yourself. And this is coming from a guy who hates exercising, by the way. I'm not one of these people who likes to do the whole P90X crazy exercise thing. I hate exercising, but I know the importance of it. So how do you solve this in your communities? I think the key thing here, and this is often very difficult because burnout is a topic that sometimes people don't want to talk about. They don't want to share with their friends. They don't want to admit that they're burning out. And in many cases, when it gets to the worst or the worsening parts of the burnout cycle, it's when other people start noticing it and people are unwilling to talk about it. One of the elements of the burnout cycle is that often people refuse to accept that they're burning out. And I certainly experienced this when people told me, and I was like, no, I'm not burning out. I'm just busy right now. But how do we do it in the community? How do we ensure that our communities that we're managing are not going to be affected by burnout? It's a really simple thing in my mind. You just got to have a policy of I got your back. The way in which we deal with burnout is we look after each other. I've seen this happen a bunch in the communities that I've worked with, where often you can see the symptoms that are happening in people. And when you can see the symptoms, it's good to have a conversation with them. And just, so I'll give you an example. There was a guy in the Ubuntu community about a year ago who I could tell was, when I interacted with him, he just seemed a little stressed. He was just a little bit more reactive to some of the things that were going on. And some other people had commented on the fact that he seemed not himself. And I reached out to him. I just said, is everything okay? I just noticed that you seem a little stressed. I just wanted to check in, just make sure you're not burning out. And I presented it not from you need to stop being so grumpy. I presented it as, I got you back. I'm a friend, and I care about you, and I care about your welfare. I care about the welfare of everybody who participates in the communities that I manage and that I participate in myself. And just having that sense of I've got you back, and I'm keeping an eye, and I'm here to help where possible, is incredibly motivating. Now, what you also want to do is you also want to encourage an atmosphere of this in your community. And I'd recommend you go out and talk to your community and say, we need to look after each other. We need to keep an eye on each other. Because, as a community manager, you can't see the behavior of everybody in your community, particularly if you've got a large community. So encouraging your community to know the different stages of the burnout cycle so they can see it when it occurs in somebody else is a great investment in your community. I'd recommend showing them this video so they can see the 12 stages. And, if one of you, put it this way, if you're watching this now because someone said you need to watch this video because we want to keep an eye out for this in our community, then thank you for watching this video. And what you need to do is you need to remember these 12 stages. And when you see those things happening in other people, talk to your community manager or maybe just reach out to that person directly if you feel comfortable and just say, look, I'm just wanting to say I'm here as a friend. And that's a great motivating thing to do. So I do have some other, just before I wrap up, I do have some other topics as well that might be useful depending on what where you fit into your particular work. So here's some other suggestions for changes that you can make. If you are a manager and you have a team and you feel like somebody on your team is experiencing some of these burnout issues, then you should be very, very supportive. It's often very hard for anyone to admit to their manager that they are burning out, that they're experiencing stress. A lot of people don't want to accept that because they see it as a sign of weakness. So keep an eye out for it in your team. And if somebody does talk to you about it or you feel like it's happening, provide a lot of support. Really validate that person's contributions. We all, as human beings, need validation. We all like to be told that we're doing a good job. We also, I think most of us want to be told when we're not doing a good job so we can fix it. So validate your team members' contributions. And if necessary, just sit down with them and say, look, I know you're stressing out. Let's restructure your objectives and what you've got to accomplish just to give you a little bit more breathing space. Maybe move some things around. I think the solution as a manager to solving burnout in your team is to be a great friend, not just a great manager. If you are working on a team and you're experiencing burnout, then please involve your manager first of all. Just let your manager know. Just say, look, I'm just feeling really stressed right now. I think I watched this YouTube video. Maybe point them to this video if necessary. And I think I'm experiencing burnout. I just wanted to tell you, I feel like I need to do something about it. But also enforce work hours. Work your contracted hours and take a lot of breaks. One of the things that affects people burning out is the fact that they don't take breaks. And again, I'm pretty guilty of this myself. But take your lunch break. Take a break every couple of hours for 15 minutes or whatever, just to get away from it. Go out, get some fresh air. A great thing to do that I've experienced is just to go and sit in the garden or go for a walk for 5 or 10 minutes. Just get outside, get the blood flowing. That can help dealing with burnout. If you are in a team and you feel like there's somebody else on your team who's burning out, not necessarily your manager or you, then reach out to them, be a friend, provide some help, and build a sense of spirit with them, build a sense of team spirit with them. Make everyone on the team know that you're friends. Emphasize the friend nature of the team. And also encourage people to vent. I mean, it doesn't matter how good of a colleague you are, how good of a community manager you are, how good of a manager you are, how good of a team player you are. Everybody gets frustrated. Everybody needs to just vent and get it off their chest. and that's a perfectly normal part of human interaction. So I think it's important to have someone who you can vent to. And then finally, just in terms of you and your private life and how your private life fits with your community work or with your career, make time to take time off. Spend some time just relaxing. Again, I'm guilty of this sometimes, that often when I take time off from work, it's because I want to do something else. But sometimes just take a couple of days off to just sit there in your pajamas and play PlayStation or relax or whatever you do to relax, even if it's just laying in bed, watching Netflix, whatever it might be. Love your hobby. Your hobbies are great ways to get that steam out of your body and into the air. It's about decompressing. So love your hobbies and don't stop socializing. Going out and spending time with friends and family is so important for so many reasons. So that's pretty much it, really. And hope it was useful. I hope these slides were useful, and that's pretty much the burnout cycle.
So there we go. Thank you for joining me again on one of these community management crib notes videos. I hope that was a useful topic to learn about. And do, of course, share your thoughts and comments and ideas and feedback about burnout and your experiences in the video comments. Please like it, subscribe to the channel, and of course keep up to date on twitter.com/John O. Bacon, and I will see you in the next video. Take care, my friend. Bye.